On the lush volcanic plains of the eastern Congo, a city of 2 million people is under siege. For years now, the major city and provincial capital of Goma has watched as a vicious, foreign-backed rebel organization known as M23 has taken the outlying towns, cut off escape routes and supply chains, and created a stranglehold on the city and its people. The Congolese government is powerless to stop them. Neighboring Rwanda funnels money and men into their ranks, and as of last week, they've all but ensured that Goma will either fall or starve while waiting for rescue. Now, longtime viewers of the Situation Room here on WarFronts will recall that we've discussed M23 and the city of Goma in the past, but in today's lead story, we return to a situation in the Congo that has changed fundamentally since the last time we left it. An attempt to establish peace in the eastern Congo between the DRC government and the neighboring government of smaller but more powerful Rwanda has collapsed, and now Rwanda barely bothers to hide its support of M23, although it continues to formally deny those allegations in rebuttals that continually find a way to be less and less believable. With the breakdown of the peace talks, M23 has surged its fighters into vulnerable government-controlled areas in a rapid assault that the DRC has been unable to resist. I will start with the town of Manova, where on Tuesday, January 21st, news came out that M23 had managed to seize the town and its surrounding areas. The capture was formally acknowledged by the DRC's local governor there, as well as rebel leaders. The specifics of the fighting are not easy to establish. This is a war where correspondents on the ground are rare and where their lives are in acute danger, so it's not uncommon that battles of this size will come and go without many key details being recorded. But there's considerably greater evidence to suggest mass displacement of the town's residents, joining up to 250,000 people displaced in the eastern Congo this year and 7 million displaced across the country. Manova is a particularly important location for the DRC and for Goma's defense. It's situated on the shores of Lake Kivu, just 45 kilometers, 28 miles away, and it's a key part of supply chains that deliver vital agricultural goods to Goma in order to sustain the city. Not only that, but control over Manova gives M23 control of a peninsula of land stretching into the lake, ending at a narrow pass less than 20 kilometers or 12 miles away from the heart of the city. Nor is the fall of Manova the only key loss that the DRC has suffered over the last several weeks. On January the 6th, the mining town of Masasi fell to the rebels. Then M23 captured the strategic towns of Lumbishi, Numbi, and Shanje. And in the next province over, M23 captured the town of Bwemana on the same day that Manova fell. And finally, on Thursday, January the 23rd, M23 converged on and then captured the absolutely critical town of Sake. It's Sake that was the Congolese government's last point of defense in its attempt to hold the highway that runs directly into Goma from the west. The city of Goma is backed up onto the border with hostile Rwanda to the east. It's served by a highway to the north that leads into lands firmly under M23's control. And now, with the city Sake gone and Lake Kivu too dangerous to flee across, Goma is completely and totally encircled with nothing left for M23 to do except to work their way down the highway into the city itself. Now, for anybody unfamiliar with the M23 rebel organization, it is important to take a moment and establish that when we describe M23 as a rebel group, we're not talking about some high-minded organization of freedom fighters or a group bearing any markers of candidacy to be called the good guys. Over just the span of the last 2 years, M23 has been accused of mass unlawful killings, the deliberate and large-scale use of sexual violence as a weapon against local communities, and a range of acts that have deliberately worsened the dire humanitarian situation that Congolese civilians are facing. They are an ethnic rebel organization led and predominantly comprised of ethnic Tutsis, and their deliberate targeting of other ethnic groups in the diverse eastern Congo has been well documented. Accounts of M23's brutality towards civilians are truly harrowing to read, even compared to war crimes perpetrated by other widely condemned groups around the world. Nonetheless, M23 is well understood to be receiving a steady stream of funds, supplies, weapons, and fighting personnel from neighboring Rwanda, also led by ethnic Tutsis, including dictator Paul Kagame. Rwanda uses M23 in what's essentially a proxy war against the DRC, where Kagame's endgame is suspected to include a potential annexation of eastern Congolese provinces where this fighting has taken place. Now, for the people of Goma, just as it's been for the people who fled from M23 elsewhere in the countryside, life under the rebels would almost certainly certainly be a horrific affair, and one that many residents of the area know full well that they wouldn't be likely to survive. Already, sources on the ground have reported frequent heavy weapons fire in and around Goma, in a clear sign that M23 is unlikely to let go of the momentum that it has. With the countryside now fully under rebel control and supply lines of even basic foodstuffs at M23's mercy, the Congolese forces inside of Goma have little room to pivot and hold off the rebels outside the city. Meanwhile, mass amounts of displaced people who fled from the countryside into Goma over the past couple of years now have nowhere to go, an especially concerning prospect because so many of them fled the violence not just to escape bullets and bombs, but to escape the treatment that they feared at the hands of M23. And while similar cities in this position in other parts of the world might be counting on their government to organize a breakthrough, there is little chance of such a thing in Goma. The DRC's military forces are badly under-equipped, they're poorly trained, deeply corrupt, and quite often lacking in motivation to put their lives on the line. Not only that, but M23's control over the Congolese countryside is far easier for them to defend in harsh, hilly, thickly forested lands with minimal infrastructure than it would be for even a more advanced military force to attack. The DRC's military is trying to force incremental gains in several points at once, diluting the offensive potency of any one group and the sheer amount of defensible points they'd need to crash through before reaching Goma should be enough to make clear that help will not be coming. That said, Congolese troops in Goma would be foolish not to resist M23 as best they can, and they know it. With full knowledge that there's not really a way to make worse the kind of treatment they'd get from M23 just by peacefully surrendering, the troops inside the city are making preparations to hold out and resist for as long as they can. Boat movement on Lake Kivu has been suspended in order to prevent M23 from sneaking into the city, and heavy artillery has moved to forward fighting positions while internally displaced refugees have worked to find spots within the city where fighting might be less intense. It's not clear quite how many Congolese troops are in Goma right now, or how many extra weapons might be available to arm locals who would take part in the defense, but it's worth noting that Goma has been the fallback point for military units defending the outlying towns and villages, where they've often been able to delay M23 war parties with just a fraction of the equipment and personnel that should be available to them now. And say what you will about Goma, but there are worse places on Earth to defend. It's backed up onto Lake Kivu, as we mentioned, and most of the critically important locations inside the city are located within a relatively tight perimeter. Of course, any defense of Goma will also have to involve an answer for the broader reality that its defenders face. The city is cut off from its surroundings. There is no way to bring in more food without either M23 or Rwanda's cooperation, and the population and its resources are already under considerable strain due to the displacement of people across the region. Not only that, but the city of Goma itself, not just the surrounding countryside, backs up onto the Rwandan border, with those key defensible areas of the city located within just 2 to 3 kilometers of that dividing line. Goma International Airport runs parallel to the border, just a couple of blocks away. Rwanda has, thus far, declined to simply march its troops into the Congo under their own banner, but now it's only the capture of Goma that stands between Rwanda and the ability to directly control a large portion of the eastern DRC. If the forces within Goma settle in for a siege and M23 proves unable to break through in any decisive way, then Rwanda can either mass its troops just across the border and force the local defenders to capitulate, or otherwise march right in and bring down the city. And if Rwanda does decide to take that final step, it's not clear that there would be any broader geopolitical force capable of stopping them. Rwanda is closely aligned to the US and Europe, something that you'd think would be a disincentive for Rwanda to engage in a naked land grab, but the country has operated under its own set of rules from the West for some time. President Paul Kagame is a clear and undeniable autocrat linked to a wide range of assassinations of Rwandan critics abroad and large-scale political repression at home as he tends a cult of personality and wages a proxy war through M23. All the while, he's got a minimal pushback from his Western allies, largely owing to the fact that so many Westerners still nearly exclusively associate Rwanda with the Rwandan genocide of 1994, and the fact that Rwanda is one of the world's leading troop contributors to the United Nations peacekeeping operations across the world, especially in Africa. What that means is that Kagame and his inner circle in Rwanda already had reason to think correctly, that their backing of a proxy insurgency in the DRC wouldn't place them in that much trouble. Now Rwanda's gone through the process of engaging and then disengaging from a potential peace process, after which time M23 made greater gains than it's done ever since the first years of its existence in the early 2010s. Yet again, Rwanda and its proxy pushed a limit and waited for reactions, and yet again, those reactions have been muted at best. From Kagami's perspective, then, why shouldn't the Rwandans just finish the job in Goma if M23 doesn't prove capable? His international allies haven't placed nearly the level of pressure on him that they could have, so why would they now? When Goma falls to M23, and unfortunately the news of the last week makes clear that this is a matter of when, not if, then M23, and Rwanda with it, would have gained direct control of a minerally rich portion of the Congo that can be exploited and converted to riches over the course of the coming decades. The DRC is, quite frankly, incapable of challenging that control once Rwanda establishes it, and between M23's strength and its brutal reputation, it's not likely that the Eastern Congo's 100-odd small militias will be willing to put their lives on the line in the name of a unified, but probably fruitless resistance. International aid organizations are getting their people out of Goma while they still can. Congolese troops are making preparations for what may become their last stand, and nobody around the world appears to have any interest in intervention. The fall of Goma is imminent, and by all outward indicators, there is no hope of stopping it now. Let's be real, guys. Your current underwear probably not pulling its weight, and that is where Sheath enters the picture, the ultimate upgrade for your daily essentials. Sheath isn't just any underwear, it is engineering. They've got their signature dual pouch design, so you get unrivaled support and comfort, eliminating friction in any sticky situations. It is the perfect undergarment. Everything stays where it's supposed to, so you can move through your day feeling confident and free. And look, winter's here, and Sheath have you covered with their cozy base layers, which are perfect for outdoor adventures or just lazy mornings. Plus, they've just launched a bamboo women's line. It's soft, it's breathable, and just as impressive as the men's stuff. And they're also the official underwear sponsors of the UFC, so they definitely don't mess around. So stop settling for less and level up. Head to sheath.com/warfronts or click the link below and use the code WarFronts to snag 20% off your order. Your future self will thank you. And now back to today's video. For long-time observers, it felt like a return to the darkest days of the conflict, an outbreak of violence so severe that Bogota's city paper called it Colombia's, quoting here, most severe humanitarian crisis in over 20 years. On the 16th of January, the tense peace between two guerrilla groups shattered along the border between Colombia and Venezuela in a remote region known as Catatumbo. According to Insight Crime, the National Liberation Army, known by its Spanish acronym of ELN, launched what it called a full-scale assault against the rival 33rd Front. By January 21st, at least 100 people had been killed, but it was the sheer number of displaced that really shocked the country. Before a week had passed, over 20,000 people had been driven from their homes. For anyone in doubt about the scale of the fighting, images of ordinary Colombians forced to shelter in sports stadiums offered chilling proof that this outburst was anything but normal. As the English language outlet Colombia Reports wrote, the offensive is the most violent Colombia has seen since well before the start of the peace process with the now defunct guerrilla group FARC. As to what caused this sudden, sustained outbreak of fighting, well, there's certainly no shortage of theories. Both ELN and the 33rd Front are technically meant to be left-wing rebels. The 33rd Front is in fact a splinter group from the Marxist-Leninist FARC group, which refused to disarm along with its comrades after a peace deal in 2016. Astute viewers will have noticed that we used the phrase technically meant to be just then. That's because both groups in reality seem less interested in global communist revolution and more interested in running local mafias based on extortion, kidnapping, and you guessed it, cocaine. That last one is particularly important for understanding the recent fighting. Catatumbo is a cocaine trafficker's paradise with 44,000 hectares of coca fields, among the largest in the country. This at a time when Insight Crime reports the local coke market is at an all-time high. Not only that, but the region also offers plenty of routes for shipping drugs across the border and into Venezuela, a country where the ELN already has a major presence. According to the news program Norte Kazuno, it may even have been a lost cocaine shipment that triggered the fighting. However, a straightforward battle for control of lucrative drug routes isn't the only theory behind the surge in violence. After all, Colombian guerrillas regularly fight one another for territory without causing large-scale humanitarian crises. As a result, some are looking for a deeper reason for the ELN's offensive, a reason that could originate across the border. Although Colombia's left-wing president Gustavo Petro initially had an extremely warm relationship with Venezuelan autocrat Nicolas Maduro, the bromance has soured in recent months. To Maduro's annoyance, Bogotá refused to recognize his sham election win last summer, and tensions have increased between the two neighbors ever since. On top of that, Venezuela has long offered a safe haven to the ELN, which it sees as ideologically aligned with its Bolivarian revolution. In the post-election protests, there were even reports of the guerrillas offering their muscle to the Maduro regime. As security consultant Jorge Mantilla told BBC Mundo, collision between the ELN and the Bolivarian National Armed Forces of Venezuela became evident since 2019. On multiple occasions and through the commands of the Eastern Front of the ELN, guerrilla leaders declared loyalty to Maduro. All of which is a roundabout way of saying that some in Colombia believe the recent violence has been induced or even directed by Caracas. Among those promoting this theory are the Colombian daily El Tiempo, which reported on an army intelligence briefing it claimed showed ELN troops arriving in Catatumbo from Venezuelan territory before writing that, quote, behind the ELN's ferocious attack, Colombia's sovereignty is at stake. President Petro himself even seemed to allude to this in a recent speech, where he declared, the actions of the ELN are not actions that are only due to the internal armed conflict. It is a deadly strategy that endangers national sovereignty. Now, obviously, Venezuela encouraging Colombian rebels to spark a land war across the border would be a major news story, one that could potentially have ramifications for the whole of Latin America. At the time of writing, on Thursday, though, it's not entirely clear that that's what's happened. Rather than a Venezuelan plot, some analysts have suggested that the violence has Colombian roots. Despite presenting itself as a united guerrilla army, the ELN is better understood as a collection of autonomous local groups organized under the same branding. A brand that's now being seriously tarnished. In other parts of Colombia, ELN groups, known as fronts, are fighting against the Gaetanist Self-Defense Forces, or AGC, better known to English speakers as the notorious Gulf Clan cartel. In most of these localized wars, the ELN is losing. In others, it has even been forced into a shaky alliance with FARC dissidents to try and retain its territory. These setbacks elsewhere have sent the ELN brand into the toilet. As such, Inside Crime suggests that the Northeast Front, based around Catatumbo, may have decided to preempt any challenges with a massive show of force. That show of force has involved hit squads going door to door with kill lists and eliminating anyone connected to the 33rd Front. It has also involved ELN flooding the region with up to 4,000 fighters. For the Gulf Clan members based in nearby Cocata, as well as other regional rivals like the EPL, this could all be construed as a warning. Don't even try and mess with this particular ELN front. But if this was the plan, then the group may have overplayed its hand. In response to the ELN's offensive, President Petro both declared a state of siege as well as issuing an emergency declaration. According to Bogotá's city paper, the declarations have given the government increased powers in the region, including, quoting here, the ability to restrict movement, impose curfews, and suspend certain laws. These powers, they'll last 90 days, at which point Congress will need to approve their extension. Petro, however, seems to be planning for a longer game. As Colombia's leader wrote on X, the ELN has chosen the path of war, and that's what they will get. For a president elected on a platform of pursuing total peace with Colombia's armed gangs, the sudden shift of rhetoric was a little head-spinning. Only last year, Petro was being lambasted for offering ELN concessions to resume negotiations. As 2025 gets underway, he seems to instead be channeling the spirit of Ecuador's Daniel Noboa, who famously declared an internal armed conflict with the nation's armed gangs. Sadly, though, such hardened rhetoric may be what the moment requires. As we write this, about 4 days before you'll see it, the Colombian military is surging 5,000 troops into Catatumbo to try and quell the violence. Yet the worry isn't so much that ELN will prove a match for them, as that this outbreak of fighting will inspire copycat offensives. Already, outbreaks of fighting in the south between FARC dissident groups have claimed about 20 lives. Should other groups increase operations as well, it could set off a chain reaction. Speaking to the New York Times, Elizabeth Dickinson of the International Crisis Group struck an ominous note. Speaking of a possible impending crisis, she told the paper of record that, quote, "We are very concerned. That moment is now. Escalations on various front lines have taken the conflict to a very dangerous inflection point." End quote. It could be that, after being elected on a peace ticket, President Petro winds up overseeing Colombia's worst bout of conflict in years. And in our final story of the week, we turn to a bit of defense and geopolitics news, first reported by way of a Reuters exclusive on the 17th of January. The news in question is a new military-industrial collaboration between the United States and India in an effort to get Indian startups better and more useful access to the wide world of American defense contractors. But rather than just being a throwaway instance of one nation engaging in basic defense collaboration with another, this new arrangement comes with much deeper implications, both on India's strategic alignment as a rising global power and on the potential for India's military industry to finally gather some momentum. The Defense Collaboration Program involves a total of 7 Indian startup companies chosen after discussions between the National Security Advisors of India and the United States around when to deepen ties between the nation's respective defense innovation departments. Among the 7 startups is Kalidio Space Systems, one of a handful of Indian companies to independently design, build, test, and offer a high-performance satellite imaging system. Also on the line is Ethereal X, also known as Ethereal Exploration Guild, working to develop fully reusable vertical landing medium-lift rockets to go to low Earth orbit, including their first rocket, the Razor Crest, and its eventual engine, the Stallion. Once operational, the Stallion will be the most powerful liquid rocket engine outside of North America, according to the company itself, offering Ethereal X the ability to basically operate as India's version of SpaceX. That's, of course, if everything goes to plan. Joining Kalidio and Ethereal X is Shyam VNL, an AI-powered corporation working to develop predictive intelligence technology and a range of other security and infrastructure-focused AI-based capabilities. 4 additional companies also made the list. According to Reuters, the US government has not yet identified the specific projects on which these companies will collaborate with American firms. But once that's decided, India's 7 startups will have access to major defense corporations, with a report specifically identifying Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and RTX, formerly known as Raytheon. They'll have access to America's Defense Innovation Unit, government organizations that work on satellite observation and emerging technologies, and more. Further details of the program have not yet been made public by the governments of either participating nation or by any of the participating corporations, but according to unnamed sources with insider information, these 7 startups' collective access to America's defense and space market could produce revenues of up to $1 billion annually. Now, there are a few layers to this deal that we're going to consider, but we're going to begin with the on-the-ground defense ramifications for both nations. On India's part, this kind of deal is a fairly massive breakthrough, offering a route for loyal Indian firms to gather critical knowledge, freely given, that informs the decision-making and arsenal development of a leading military superpower. For India to have access to things like a homegrown, reliable, reusable rocket to low Earth orbit would be a major boon to India's National Space Agency, its surveillance and intelligence services, and the branches of its military. The satellites aboard those rockets could be a hell of a lot more useful if they're granted imaging capabilities on par with some of America's satellite intelligence systems. The same is true for every core capability that these companies develop and subsequently bring back to India for broader integration. And for the US, a nation increasingly willing to rely on corporations to fill even complex defense industrial needs, a partnership with Indian firms provides the same range of benefits that US companies get via outsourcing: cheaper skilled labor, considerable manufacturing capacity, and more. Then there's the geopolitical angle, where India's participation in this program is an interesting sign of the times for Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his allies. India is a founding member of what's referred to today as the BRICS organization. It's historically been a prime customer for Russian and post-Soviet weapons and military equipment, and its push for strategic autonomy, paired with its arsenal of nuclear weapons, have granted it leverage and freedom to play both sides in large-scale geopolitical showdowns between the US, Europe, China, Russia, and others. But while India is taking care to continue with its public showings of openness to Russia and China, expecting to host Vladimir Putin in 2025 and working to de-escalate with China over the 2 countries' Himalayan tensions, a defense industrial partnership with the US is something considerably more substantial. Even the most trusted US allies would attest that it is hard at times to be a military industrial partner to Washington. US technologies are subject to a wide range of export controls and restrictions, basically beholden to the will of the Pentagon, meaning that any nation that opts into such partnerships is consenting to a whole lot more than the mere optics of a partnership. Instead, they're consenting to an arrangement where the US gets a direct say in that nation's matters of defense, and although the specifics around this particular deal in India aren't yet known to the public, it's extremely unlikely that Washington would make any exceptions here. With a nation like India that wants to be perceived internationally as a neutral, autonomous, but geopolitically engaged actor, it can be hard to tell what's what. Narendra Modi will almost certainly either host or meet internationally with Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, and more before the year 2025 is out. For a country like India, sending mixed signals on where its loyalties lie isn't a bug with its strategic approach, it is a feature. But in a world where India isn't willing to sign on to NATO-led or Russian-led or China-led military initiatives outright, quiet defense partnerships like these provide the clearest possible image of where Narendra Modi's head is at. Getting in deep with American defense behemoths is an act that's mutually exclusive to any effort to get in deep with their Russian equivalent, and India appears to have made its choice. That choice was already beginning to seem more and more apparent given the overall picture of India's recent defense acquisitions, but an active, collaborative defense industrial partnership with America, of any scale, is very hard to dismiss as insignificant. Indeed, this isn't the only military-industrial partnership with the West that India is now actively considering. The nation's air force is currently poised to set up a collaborative arrangement with Sweden's Saab company to purchase over 100 copies of the advanced Gripen jet fighter and set up an entire manufacturing ecosystem to build and maintain the jets inside India. The country's navy has recently announced that it plans to procure 22 Sea Guardian drones from General Atomics, making them the first non-NATO country ever to receive drones from the company. The Indian defense world has shown signs of rapid evolution recently, but also areas where considerable improvements are still required, particularly around things like engine and avionics technology for advanced aircraft, meaning that there are a range of potential areas where India and the West could step up their collaboration further. While India has been very clear in its intent never to join Western organizations like NATO, India doesn't need to join these organizations formally in order to move itself closer to the West in the long run, and right now, brighter and brighter signs and signals indicate that that's precisely what India is going to try to do. As New Delhi continues to reap the benefits of its outward strategic autonomy, there's real movement under the surface that indicates that India's preference for Russia is coming to an end, as its rapprochement with China remains limited and wary. Instead, seemingly inconsequential partnerships like this newest one are important indicators of where India is actually headed. It's a valuable double game that India's playing, and it is a game that India knows how to play well as one of the world's most important rising powers charts its own path forward on its own terms. Thank you for watching.